Hello, everyone. It's Friday. It's Father Craig Friday.
Welcome.
We're here. We love
Glad
Fridays.
that you're here
We
on
love
Friday.
Father Craig and Fridays.
I like Fridays too.
Yeah, it's good. For those tuning in for the first time, Father Craig Friday is where you can ask a Catholic priest your questions, and he will try and answer them. And so the first one is a good one. The first one is, okay, here's a scenario. There's a project that needs to be done. Would you rather work alone or work on a team?
Oh my goodness. What kind of project? Is it like a house chore?
No, one that, I don't know, let's say it's a work project and it needs to be done. Would you rather team up with people and try and get it done collectively?
It's far too vague to
Or would
to
you
answer
rather
this.
just take on a work project alone and just tackle it yourself?
It depends. If I were going to build something in my wood shop when I used to have one, which I no longer have.
I'm talking about work, not your wood shop.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
So you're here at Olo.
Well,
you have something
okay.
that needs to be done.
right.
Are you like, you know what, I'll just do this myself? Or are you like, I want to work on a team and get this done collectively? Divvy up the work.
And how big is the project? Is it?
Oh man, we got to be
I
so
need to know
specific.
more specifics. Particulars matter.
Okay.
Okay.
I,
so
for one, would prefer to work alone. I'll go ahead and answer that question.
no. Okay. So if we're gonna reorganize the kitchen,
I just don't like relying on, I'll tell students to help me with something, and then I'll walk in. I end up having to do it myself anyways because they did such a...
I would like to say teamwork. However, I would if it wasn't necessity to delegate things, I'd probably just do it myself.
Because then I know, and then I also know that if it's done poorly, I also know that that's on me.
Right.
I don't have to do the guessing game of, well, who did it, or who, oh, well, I didn't do it. So-and-so was supposed to do it. It just seems like it saves me time in the long run to just do it myself.
I agree, except that part of our job is to raise up students and give them responsibilities.
And I give them
so
responsibilities.
They can do it.
I do. Yeah, I asked someone to take out the flowers today.
Are they still sitting there?
No, they took them out.
They took them out. Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right.
See?
Yeah. They just put them in the back
No,
porch?
I told them dump it in the dumpster.
Okay.
I said not the
Good.
recycle in the dump. You have to be so specific with college
Well,
kids.
we actually had to pay the recycle people for putting the wrong things in that bin. So that's important.
Okay. All right. Well, good thing.
They called it a contamination fee.
Really?
Yeah.
A little cross-contamination.
Yeah.
Don't put your trash in our recycle.
That's right.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what happened.
All right. Well, let's get to the first question then. This came in from a listener, and they wanted to know, if you kill 1 million people and go to confession, are you excused from your sins?
Well, presuming you're contrite, yes.
What?
Yeah, I know.
I'm
I'm
gonna just say what everyone's thinking. That can't be right.
Really?
I mean, I'm not
Is
thinking
God's
that.
mercy that small?
Yeah,
I
see,
don't know.
I'm not thinking that. I'm saying what other people are thinking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'm answering those other people.
Okay.
No, so, we don't want to minimize the gravity of such an offense. Obviously, that's a very, very serious thing. And, that's horrible. And we'd hope that no one would ever do that. Mm-hmm. Duh, right? But we also know that probably people have done that. And that... we don't know if they've gone to confession or not. The challenge here, I think, is that the majority of people who would do something that horrific, it's possible that they might repent and go to confession, but I think it also unlikely because the gravity of such a serious thing really deteriorates the soul. So in such an awful capacity, to be able to do something like that to begin with, you've got to be, I think, pretty far gone.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's an accident. I don't know how that could be possible.
You accidentally hit the launch button on the nuke pad, and
I don't know. You hear these extremes in movies, people think they're playing a war game on a computer, and then it turns out it's it's a real war game. Think Ender, or what was that movie back in the day? Was it War Games?
Yeah.
I think it was actually called War
that's
Games.
it.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Yeah. Something like that.
So we should have listened to our mothers when they're like, get off of the computer, quit playing games. We should be like, yeah.
I wouldn't go so far as that. I really enjoy Nazi zombies with my dad. I'm not going to lie. That would be a really bizarre hypothetical circumstance.
But hypothetically, let's say in an instance like that.
Right, but let's say someone actually has committed that grievous crime and they actually repent, which we believe to be possible, and they go to confession, they're contrite, absolutely, their sins would be forgiven. Now, the eternal effects of that sin would be mitigated, but there's still an aspect of of penance that needs to be served for that, a temporal effect to that on the person that has to be worked out with fear and trembling, I think. And so it's not just like this erasure of anything bad that's happened. And it is a forgiveness of sins, but like, think of it this way with confession. If you have a grievous wound, you go to the ER and they scrub out the dirt and the nasty, they clean it all up and they sew it up. But it's going to take time after that, a moment, to heal. You have to take the medicine, you have to do the rehab, you have to do all the things necessary to get whole, and you still might walk with a limp. And the same is true of confession. You go to confessional, and the confession, you get patched up, you get sewn up, you get cleaned up.
Stops the bleeding.
Stops the bleeding. You're not dying out. Now you can live. But there's a lot of healing that takes place after that continues to happen, so long as you care for it and you don't reinfect it or reopen the wound or re-injure yourself, so to speak, right? Like you got to clean it out. You got to take the antibiotics. You got to do the rehab, and you're going to walk with a limp. The more serious it is, the more you're going to sort of walk with that limp for the whole of your life, right? I can't imagine taking a human life, and it's a grievous thing, and yet people have done that, and they've gone to confession, and they've been forgiven. St. Paul, right? A notorious sinner, right? And, and I imagine he carried that with him, and yet how much more the glory of God, because he recognizes how great God's mercy is to him in that. So.
Okay. All right. Next question says, if friendship is to bring the other to holiness, how can I draw someone to God in a loving way when I see them living a sinful life?
This is a beautiful question.
It's such a great question.
Have you had any experience with this?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of those things that I can't say that there's a blanket statement of like, this is the right way to handle that, because it really is dependent on the friend. It's dependent on the situation. It's dependent on the sin. There's a lot of like variables that are there, because how I would maybe call my sister onto holiness might look a little bit than how I would call, a stranger who just comes by my office for the first time and wants to talk. And,
right.
Even just the person, but then of course the sin that's going on.
Well, it's being described as a friendship, right?
Okay, so someone I know, but still, my friendship with my sister and mother is very different than my friendship with, a student that I'm familiar with here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the relationship matters, and what type of relationship it is.
Sin, and how habitual that sin is, or how grave. And
I think, though, that, there's different types of friendship. There's friendships that are based on sort of a mutual enjoyment. Think like hobbies, for example. You both like to go bowling. You're part of a bowling club. Or, there's relationships that are based on, work. You might have someone that you work at HEB and you work with them, and so you should have sort of a friendship with them. And then there's another level of friendship where, like, you are in it for the betterment of the other. Like, this is someone who's like really trying to like, I want to build my friend up and say what's true and good to them, regardless of maybe how they feel about it. And you're both sort of committed to that in the friendship. There's degrees or levels and types of friendships, and that last one is what's called a virtue friendship, and that would be much easier to do this sort of thing than the other. And we'd really like our friendships to look like this mostly. So I would say, the point here is deep and authentic relationships with people. I think you'd have to sort of gauge where that friendship is, the level of trust that's there. But I wouldn't make the mistake of sort of this thing that's erroneously attributed to St. Francis that says, preach the gospel all times, when necessary, use words. He never said that.
Yeah.
He would have very specifically sort of said, use words, right? He was a preacher, an itinerant preacher.
He would preach to the birds. Like, he was such a preacher.
Like he would not have said that, right? And I think, doesn't Trent Horn have a book called What the Saints Didn't Say or something like that? I need to read that, because that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I think the point being here is that having a deep, authentic relationship with others, you look for the opportunities to invite, and a lot of the times that happens through questions, witness, sharing your own experiences with others, being honest with people. But you want to spark, I think, with those. So it depends on if do they have faith at all? Do they have any sort of background? So you might just be simply building trust, and then you might then be sparking curiosity to the point that they actually are actively seeking, right? And then from actively seeking, right, there becomes sort of like this openness, and from openness then comes sort of discipleship. That's sort of Sherry Weddell's Forming Intentional Disciples sort of model. And so there might be sort of moving a friend along this continuum, not manipulation, not in domination, but through free invitation. Yes. And it depends on what the friendship is. And so if it's a friendship of like mutual hobbies, can you sort of build the friendship to becomes a virtue friendship, right? Or if it's a business friendship or your work, can you move it to a friendship where you're doing fun stuff together and then move it to the point where it becomes a virtue friendship, where you're really in it for each other's good? Can you sort of build the friendship up to the point where you can bring this invitation freely before them? Ask them questions. Well, what do you think about God? Do you pray? What is it like when you pray? What is it? What is your deep desires in life? What do you long for? What do you want to accomplish in life? What do you think the meaning and purpose of life is? Right? And there's lots of ways to build friendship, but it's about listening to know and to understand rather than to judge or to look for a solution or to solve a problem. Questions like, what's your favorite childhood memory, right, is a great question. I asked my dad this the other day, and it's so beautiful to hear his answers, and I heard a story from him I'd never heard before, and I really got to know him better. And we can do those things to build friendships. And then the friendships can sustain or sort of allow for those deeper invitations, those deeper conversations, the sharing of heart with heart, that leads to a deeper encounter with God.
Yeah. And I think one crucial kind of element there is like patience in that, because it takes patience to sit there and kind of journey with that friend as they struggle with this sinful life or that sort of thing. And maybe you're slowly revealing truths to them but you're loving on them through the process, because I think one thing people do is they focus so much on the behavior, but the reality is like, okay, if there's a girl and she's sleeping around with a bunch of different guys, you could look at her and say, that's bad, you're wrong, you're going to hell, blah, blah, blah. And it's probably not going to cause her to change, right? But then when you love her through that and you allow her to encounter Christ's love, that love is so strong that it can be transformative. And then the behavior almost begins to not correct itself, but like because she's encountering authentic love, now she desires better, and suddenly she's like, maybe I don't need to do those things anymore.
I think that hope comes from witness a lot of the times. I think when someone's able to say, you can ask the question of, let's say this woman, is sleeping around a lot, like, how does that make you sort of feel? What are you looking for in those relationships? How do you feel after those things? Did you know that, I used to struggle with that too, and I found something way better, right? A God who loves me unconditionally, and can I introduce you? Like, I don't know, like, I don't know what that looks like or how to do that exactly. It's, but something like that.
From a place of non-judgment in a way that really you're trying to get them to encounter love, being God himself.
Right.
And then through that, then it's almost like it's a domino effect. And that's the slow process. That's where patience really comes in, because not everyone wakes up the next day and says, okay, I'll never do that again.
Oh no, sometimes it takes years and years of struggling with the same behavior. But I really enjoy, it's one of the principles of my life, I think, is Aquinas says doing follows being. And I think about that a lot, because I think it's an identity crisis, an identity issue. And if we can come to know ourselves, our truest identity, before God, as sons and daughters, like that's where the activity, the behavior change comes from. Yeah. From the relationship, the encounter with God, and that loving identity. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Last question here. What is time? Does it affect God, or is it just a theory we as humans have created to put our reality into perspective? So what is time?
I am not an expert on this. This is definitely a question for natural philosophy or theology. And I guess there's two primary considerations maybe, is the subjective nature of time, right? There's sort of this experience, like sometimes times move slower or faster according to how we're experiencing it. And there's also the objective nature of time, sort of, that happens in sort of set increments, and whether or not we want time to pass or not, it does, Yep. I don't know exactly. I was looking at some articles and things, and it seems really complex, and it's a very, I guess, hotly debated thing. But it seems like maybe there's some things that are, for sure. So one is, once time passes, we don't get it back. I think that's
not yet, though. If you look into quantum like physics and stuff like that, they're looking at that dimension as
okay.
I mean, it's a whole can of worms. But
have you read? Tell me more if you have thoughts about this. I'd love to hear this because, the stuff I was reading is like, okay, here's the general ideas of the objective nature of time. That there's measurable increments, that there's continuity between one thing and before, and that you can't go back and change it. So, I mean, I'd love to hear your quantum
get into like the
theory,
quantum
physics
stuff. Yeah. When you get into that stuff, so it talks about, there being more than just 4 dimensions. Now we're aware of 4 dimensions, up and down, side to side, back and forth, and time being the 4th. And what they are suggesting is that, okay, well, if you can move around in all 3 of the dimensions, the 4th dimension is just another one of those dimensions.
Well, time is a 4th dimension, and the idea is that it only moves forward.
Right. But and this is a part of like string theory and all sorts of crazy things, but like, okay, if you imagine like time as a line, okay, what they're looking at is like, could you bend that line, and therefore through these things called wormholes, you can drop then from this part, even though you're here on the time spectrum, so to speak, if you were to fold it, could you then drop through and then be at that other place in time? Because you have, I mean, it's a whole can of worms. That's what I was like.
But then all the paradoxes set in. Where like, if you went back in that wormhole to a previous time and you killed your own grandfather, like, would you be born? And the answer to that is, it's a paradox. Yes. Yeah. And then
can you get back?
Does it spawn an entire new timeline? I mean, there's all sorts of things around that.
My answer to this is just God is outside of space and time. And so
there are lots of thinkers who have thought about it. I think Thomas Aquinas has some writings on time. Mm-hmm. I think Augustine does too in his Confessions. It might be chapter 10 or 11. I think he calls time a distension of the soul. I have no idea what that means. But I mean, I think it has to do with the created world.
Yeah.
Yeah, because God is there's the natural sort of existence in the time that we experience. There's the preternatural, which is where angels and demons would exist, this purely spiritual beings, and then there's the supernatural, where only God abides. Yes, so there's like this time lasagna, so to speak, and God would be equally present to all time at once, right? And the preternatural, the angels and demons would be present to time in a certain sense at once. And this is some of the thinking around it. And then there's the natural, which is us. It happens in sort of this chronos sort of way, which is like a clock that ticks and it goes in this continuous sort of way. And then there's what's called the kairos, right, which is the eternal moments that sort of exist in a different way in time. So, for example, the Paschal mystery of Christ is present not only at the time it happened chronologically, but now it's present at all times throughout from that point, right, to now. So it's made present in the mystery of the sacraments to this time and age, in every Mass that's offered, every sacrament that's celebrated. And so we can share in that moment, even though chronologically it's already passed. And so there's a lot of questions around all those sorts of things, but I don't know much about quantum physics.
Yeah. That's a whole other, and it's all speculative right now. I mean, there's some stuff they can prove, but a lot of stuff. It's like,
I read a lot of sci-fi fantasy and I hear a lot of timeline things. Yeah. And
they're suggesting there's like most physicists will agree that there's at least 12 dimensions.
I had a problem with Endgame, Marvel Endgame, with Captain America. I think that breaks their theory when he showed up in that same timeline. Anyway, I just think that's a problem.
I have a problem with the fact that you just mentioned lasagna, and now that's all I can think about.
I know, that would be really good right now, wouldn't it? I'm not supposed to eat carbs anymore. My doctor says.
Then why'd you mention lasagna?
1 week ago, I stopped eating carbs.
How do you feel?
And sugars. I've lost almost 10 pounds already in 1 week.
In 1 week?
Yeah. There's probably other causes too, but that's pretty significant.
That's huge. 10 pounds in a week is, I don't even know if that's
I'm also
healthy.
like 3 times your body weight.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Next time, lasagna.
Yeah, more than you ever wanted to know about Father Craig's health and diet as well.
But we love you, so we are concerned with it because you're mind, body, and spirit. So
some people out there may not love me though.
Oh,
I don't know. It's okay though, because guess what?
God
Jesus loves me.
Oh, he loves you. Okay.
Oh, them too.
Them too. Well, that's what my thing. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Can we edit that out?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, I'm going to leave it in though because we're talking about lasagna.
Can we edit that part out?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so if you have your own questions, you can submit them to podcast@txstatecatholic.org. You send in your questions, and we will take a stab at it like we would take a stab at a lasagna to cut out.
I use a fork.
Oh, you use a fork to cut it?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how to feel about it.
Our Lady of Wisdom.
Pray for us.